the ego defense mechanisms are essentially shielding you from self-awareness. And it's doing that because it doesn't think you can handle the truth. What's the answer? Once we realize that we have all of these ego defense mechanisms that really distort our reality, and when they come up, others in our life get frustrated with us, and it kind of breaks apart our relationships. We get these blinders, and we're kind of living in this alternate reality when we're depending on our ego defense mechanisms. So what do we do about it?
You're watching Developing Potential with Diana Keuilian.
Hi friends, welcome back. Today we're talking about why everyone in your life is so frustrated with you. Now, some call these ego blinders, and Sigmund Freud called them your ego defense mechanisms. This is a tough topic, friends, because this requires that we really look at ourselves and look at the little crutches that we have picked up along the way to feel better about ourselves. Now, what's the problem with having some of these ego defense mechanisms, right? Like if my brain is creating these little crutches for me to feel better about myself, like what's the big deal, right? Well, as I said in my opening, it frustrates the people around you because you're not really reacting with reality. You are kind of constructing your own reality with the use of these ego defense mechanisms, and you're making the world just look a little rosier and making yourself look a little more blameless. And for the people around you, this can be really frustrating. And so I hope that as I go through these ego defense mechanisms, I hope that you'll look at yourself, because it is so much easier to really look at the others, everyone else in our life, and you can point out like, oh my gosh, my spouse uses this one, my friends use that one, and my kids do this one, right? They're going to pop out to you. But really the benefit is in looking at what do we do, right? Because that's something that you can fix. You can work on the way that you take in information and the way that you either, face reality or try to really protect yourself and shield yourself from seeing things as they truly are. So this is a moment of empowerment for us. And in the back of your mind, you're still going to notice that, the people you know do these because we all do them. But really focusing on how can we move through these to just be more open with reality. Okay, so the first ego defense mechanism is called displacement. So the most common explanation of this one is you're at work, your boss is yelling at you, you have all this frustration that you can't take out at work with your boss, so you go home and you kick the dog, right? And that's maybe a cruel example, but essentially when you have negative emotions pent up that you're not able to express to the source, you turn to someone who's less threatening and you unload them on this other person. But this is one that really plays out a lot in families where the parents get frustrated throughout their day and they're not able to confront these different sources of frustration. And so maybe you go home and you're short with your kids, right? Or maybe your fuse is a little shorter and, your kids do one little thing and you jump on them. And if you really pause and think about it, all of that you had pent up really wasn't because of your kids. This is displacement. The source of this, this frustration is coming from elsewhere, and then you kind of throw it on someone who's more vulnerable, and it's just safer, right? This is a really good one to pay attention for because it can really damage relationships when we get into this habit. And we all know the experience of when somebody blows up at us and we know it doesn't make sense, right? You're like, wait a minute, I didn't do anything. Why are you this upset with me? And that would be an example of when someone else is using displacement onto you. So it is not it's not an ego defense mechanism that helps us come together in relationships. It really tears people apart. Okay, I feel like this is the number one ego defense mechanism, denial. And this is something most of us understand, this concept of denial, which is really just denying that something exists, right? It's something that does exist, but we just completely deny that it exists. And this can show up in so many different ways in our life. I think one of the most common ones these days is with vices and things like denying the fact that you have, you're using alcohol or you're drinking too much, or denying this fact that you're eating too much or, watching too much Netflix, right? It's so easy to just deny it. Maybe a little voice starts to come up that says like, wait a minute, this is, am I out of line here? Am I gone down this road too far? Might come up, but you just deny it, right? And denial is something that's so easy to see in other people, right? Because we can see it, and we don't have to protect ourselves from the truth when it has to do with someone else. And so a way to really become aware of the denial in your life is to pay attention to what those around you are telling you, right? If a theme is coming up with the people that matter to you, and let's just say that theme is, hey, you're drinking a lot, right? If that theme is coming up, as much as you can deny it, they're giving you hints, right? They're showing you like, hey, we see something that you don't. Your ego defense is blocking you from really seeing this issue, but we see it. Okay, so the next two ego defense mechanisms are very similar. So we have repression and suppression. So with repression, we're not really in control. We're unconsciously suppressing or keeping an unpleasant memory or unpleasant information. We're keeping it out of our conscious mind, but it's all happening in the background, right? This is repression. You've probably heard of like repressed memories before. So this is something that you don't really have control over. And then suppression is when you kind of remember something, but then you quickly push it away, right? And so this is a way that we can just protect ourselves from really real things that have happened. And this might, come up in a relationship that you're in. Maybe there's different red flags that you're seeing, but as soon as you start to kind of think about it, you just push the thought away, right? Or maybe this could be something to do with, your job or your career, where maybe there's this little voice in the back of your head that's telling you, like, you need to do something different, right? Like, you need to stretch yourself, and you just suppress it. You just push it away because you don't really want to deal with it. So this is a big one for me. And if you do a little digging, you might find that this is one that you do as well, but projection. So projection is when we assign our own kind of unacceptable feelings or qualities onto other people. So for me, I find myself when I start to think like, oh, I don't think this person likes me, I notice most of the time, if I really dig, it's like, wait a minute, I don't think I really like this person, but I turn it around, and it's very consistently I do this, where like, man, I just don't think they like me. It's like, well, wait a minute, maybe you don't actually like them or align with their values. But this can be with anything, right? So if we feel, a common example is like, if you find yourself being, interested in somebody else, by the use of projection, all of a sudden you'll be thinking that your partner's cheating on you. So you're turning it around and you're essentially accusing someone else of what you are experiencing. And it really is interesting to dig around and to pay attention when you start to have a strong feeling or a paranoid feeling or something that kind of comes out of nowhere, to really kind of dig and be like, wait a minute, do I feel this way? And am I just assigning this to someone else? This is a tricky one. So rationalization is where we justify an unacceptable feeling or behavior with logic. So an example could be that, you're trying to buy your dream house and you were denied for the loan. And so you tell yourself, well, here's all the reasons why it's a good thing that I didn't get that house, right? That's an example where you're rationalizing what happened instead of really feeling the uncomfortable feeling or the disappointment, right? It's a way to divert ourselves from the reality of what just happened. So another way that rationalization could come up would be if you feel that someone in your life is not treating you with respect, then maybe you'll turn around and treat them with less respect. And maybe this isn't the standard you have for yourself, but you rationalize it, right? Like, hey, why am I going to treat them better than they treat me? And so it's just like you're using some logic to justify not living with your values. So regression is another one where we can just kind of revert to earlier, more immature behaviors, depending on the situation that arises, right? And so maybe you've had this experience where you've gotten into an argument with someone and you find yourself acting very childlike or acting very immature. And you're wondering, like, after it happens, like, what happened? Like, what happened to me? Really, it was a form of regression where your ego defense mechanisms came in to protect you from what was happening and just allowed you to kind of regress to this younger version of yourself. So reaction formation is another ego defense mechanism that's kind of strange because it's essentially flipping the way you feel to the opposite. This took me a while to understand this one, but essentially, let's say you're going through a breakup and you are heartbroken over it, but instead of acting and feeling sad, you start acting happy about it, right? You start kind of like putting this, painting this brighter picture than what you're really experiencing. So it's almost like replacing an uncomfortable or maybe unpleasant emotion with the opposite, even though it's not true to your experience. And again, I think this is one that's easier to see in other people, because when someone else is acting out of congruence with what the situation would conjure up in someone, it's very clear from the outside to be like, wait a minute, I know you should be sad, but you're acting like really weird and silly, right? And so it's this reaction formation where our ego is like, you know what, I'm just going to give you just an easier emotion to deal with right now, even though it's completely out of congruence with what you're actually experiencing. Okay, so the final ego defense mechanism that we're going to cover today is called sublimation. And I also kind of think of this as avoidance. So essentially, you convert an unacceptable impulse into a more acceptable outlet. And so for an example, if you get upset at your partner, instead of having a direct conversation and working through it, you will go and distract yourself and go do something else. And you'll avoid having that potentially uncomfortable exchange that would kind of push you through the issue, right? And so this is really this avoidance of something that might be uncomfortable, which we know this always gets us into deeper issues, and yet we still do it sometimes, right? And so this takes us back to really the need to learn how to deal with uncomfortable emotions. So what's the answer? Once we realize that we have all of these ego defense mechanisms that really distort our reality, and when they come up, others in our life get frustrated with us, and it kind of breaks apart our relationships, right? We get these blinders and we're kind of living in this alternate reality when we're depending on our ego defense mechanisms. So what do we do about it? And it's not going to come as a surprise to you when I say the answer is to do more self-reflection and to just increase your self-awareness, right? Because the ego defense mechanisms are essentially shielding you from self-awareness. And it's doing that because it doesn't think you can handle the truth. And so this faces us with this question, like, can I handle the truth about myself? Am I strong enough to be okay with the fact that, we don't always do and say everything correctly? And oftentimes things are our fault and we need to take responsibility, right? So these ego defense mechanisms want to put the blame outside of ourselves versus stepping up and just taking some self-responsibility and some accountability and really actually growing as a person. All right, friends, I hope this was helpful and that you learned something about your ego defense mechanisms. I hope you were able to really be self-reflective and try to expand your self-awareness as we dove into this difficult topic, right? And just know that the more you dive into this, the more you expand your self-awareness and take that accountability, the more you will be able to put down these ego defense mechanisms to grow as a person and to really grow in maturity. So if you like this, please subscribe, like the content, share it with a friend. If this resonated as something that someone in your life might find interesting or useful. I appreciate you for watching, and I will be back next week with another message.
Thanks for watching Developing Potential with Diana Keuilian.